everybody, and welcome to another Agile IT Tech Talk. I'm your host, Sean Spicer. This is going to be a good one today. We're being joined by Bob German, Microsoft Technical Architect. I have heard his name bandied about by a number of other Tech Talk guests, such as Kevin Martins, Matt Sosman. So today we're going to be talking about SharePoint and Teams and how they're better together. Just a reminder of the format. This is a presentation and demo, and then at the end we open it up for a Q&A. Go ahead and ask questions throughout the session in the questions box below. Once we're done with the live session, we do cut those questions out before publishing to YouTube. That is a benefit just for Agile IT clients. So you can ask questions about your specific environment and your specific concerns. For those of you joining us on YouTube, feel free to give us a like and follow, and there will be a full write-up with any links and relevant information in the description below. So how you doing today, Bob?
Great, how are you?
Doing wonderful. Really excited to have you on. I've heard, as I mentioned, I've heard your name bandied about for a couple months, so it was
Thanks for having me on the program.
Connected. Awesome. So with no more preamble, I'm going to go ahead and make you presenter right now.
So this is a question that comes up a lot, and I'm often asked about Teams and SharePoint. People will say, how come you have Teams and team sites and SharePoint? And they'll say, gee, is Teams replacing SharePoint, or which one should I use? And the thing is that it's not actually an A versus B kind of a thing. In fact, as you'll see today, SharePoint and Teams work together and are really better together. If you've been using Teams, you've probably been using SharePoint and OneDrive without even realizing it. And OneDrive is actually based on SharePoint as well, so it's all kind of connected together. In fact, every team site, every team has a SharePoint team site as part of it. So you can't even have a team without a SharePoint team site. All of this is part of a concept called Office 365 groups. Now, Office 365 groups, you may or may not be familiar with them. It's a membership service for Microsoft 365, and it's based on Azure Active Directory. So a lot of people know about distribution lists and security groups in Azure Active Directory. We also have Office 365 groups in which you get, well, as my friend Sue Hanley says, you get a group of people and some stuff. You get the people that you get the things that those people, the shared assets that those people need to get their work done. So every Office 365 group has owners, a list of owners, a list of members, and then it has some shared assets, which include a SharePoint team site, an Outlook calendar and mailbox, a OneNote, a planner, and a bunch of other things that can be optional. One of those optional elements is a Microsoft team, and it's really, you cannot have a team without an Office 365 group. When you create the team, you get an Office 365 group, and you kind of can't have the team without the group that goes with it. Now, Teams is really dependent on SharePoint for its file storage. And I'll demonstrate all this in just a second. I think this is my last slide, actually. We spend most of the time in demo, and I'll show you how this works. But Teams stores its files in SharePoint, and not just anywhere in SharePoint. It stores, if you're in a team, it stores the files in the team that's part of the Office 365 group of which the team is based. So you'll see that they're really tightly connected, and the team site gets, a SharePoint team site gets created as part of creating the Office 365 group and as part of creating every team. The document library inside that SharePoint site has a folder for each channel in the team. And by default, all the channels and folders inherit the permissions of the team. So the team's permissions and the Office 365 group permissions are the same. It's not like they're synchronized, it's like they're the same. Teams doesn't store the permissions, it uses Office 365 groups. And then those files in SharePoint, their permissions by default are based on the members and owners of that Office 365 group. So it's all connected. Now, if I'm in a team or a channel, and I'm going to assume you know a little bit about Teams and have used it before, and you know what a team and a channel is, then you can see in the picture how your files are organized in the SharePoint side. But another really important aspect of Teams is one-on-one chat or group chats. And in those cases, suppose Sean and I are having a chat, and I send him a PowerPoint deck. That deck will actually go in my OneDrive because I'm the sender of that file. So all those files get put into the sender's OneDrive in a special folder called Microsoft Teams chat files. And then each file gets unique permissions. So if I shared it with Sean, in a chat with Sean, the permission would be set so that only he and I could see that file. And every file automatically gets the permissions set accordingly so that nobody's going to see anything that they shouldn't see. So let's with those kind of concepts set up, I want to kind of take you through the whole experience. We'll start with the files experience and elaborate on that quite a bit. Then we'll get into the pages experience and how you can actually integrate SharePoint pages and news items into your teams. And then I'll show you how you can take an existing team site and make it into a Microsoft team. And if the demo gods and goddesses are smiling, I'll do that right here in real time during the demo. Okay, so here we are in Microsoft Teams, and I'm going to work today mostly in this channel here in this team for insurance adjusters. And you can see these are a bunch of folks who run around and do damage appraisals and also underwriting activity or on new properties and things like that. So they're traveling around a lot, and Teams is a great place for them to collaborate and share information, ask questions, and things of that nature. Of course, they also have some shared files. And so here you can see some files that the team is using, and maybe not the most realistic titles, but here they are. And these files are actually inside of SharePoint. Now, one thing that you can do here is you can add cloud storage, and this is something that's kind of interesting, but you can add additional folders in here that are based on all these different services, including SharePoint, which would allow me to put files in or refer to files in some other SharePoint site. But without doing that, these files right here that are just in my team, I didn't do anything special, I just uploaded them, they're actually in SharePoint right now. And that allows me to do a number of really great things. One of which is to just open the files up inside of a web browser. So Teams is browser-based. You'll find the Teams application uses a technology called Electron to allow it to work to sort of be a browser-based desktop application. The mobile clients are a little bit of a different story. But suffice to say that what you're seeing here is not the Excel rich client. What you're seeing is the browser-based Excel hosted inside of Teams. So this is great because maybe I'm collaborating with an external user who doesn't have Excel on his or her computer. Well, no problem. This works right here inside of the browser-based client, and it's all kind of transparent to the user. It just looks like, okay, I'm going to edit this inside of Teams, and indeed I am. This is sort of one of the first advantages of using SharePoint for the underlying storage, because in order to do use the browser-based Office clients, and in order to do something called co-authoring, which allows more than one user to edit at the same time, you need to implement a special protocol called WOPI, which is the Web Application Open Platform Interface. Don't worry about remembering any of that. It's just that there is a fairly advanced protocol involved in the synchronization. It gets used by the browser-based clients, and it's not available. I mean, it is available, and it's a public protocol that people can implement, but it's just not in a file share or just any old place. So a great place for us to get that is from SharePoint or OneDrive. Now, if we want to take a peek under the covers, all I have to do is click Open in SharePoint right here, and it's going to bring me into the SharePoint site associated with that team. Notice the URL up here. There's the name of the site. It's the same as the name of the team, and it's the same as the name of the Office 365 group. In fact, you can see that this is a private group, which really just from a SharePoint perspective means that there's nobody allowed, there are no visitors that can come in here. You have to be a member or an owner of the group in order to see this content. So now here I am inside of looking at the same files in SharePoint. And if I go up a level, you can see here are my channels, right? And I've got some other files here, and this is real world. There might have already been some files in here if this started as a SharePoint site. But the channel organization is echoed in the folders. Now that I'm in SharePoint, I can do things like get at the metadata. So maybe I want to see the details of this file. And you can see here that I can have various metadata associated with this. I can have compliance settings. I can see who has access here. And so this is just starting to expose some of the advantages of SharePoint. The reason they did this, in addition to not reinventing the wheel, is because SharePoint is such a rich document management tool. I have a recycle bin. I have a version history. So I can come in here and look at the different versions of this document that have happened over time, right? And even go back to one. As part of that, I could even recover the files. So suppose somebody had ransomware on their computer and they were synchronizing files, which I'll show in a second, and all these files got encrypted by some bad guys, right? This is a new feature. All I have to do is come in here and click Restore the Library, and I can go back to any point in time and restore. So this is a demo site, so I don't have a lot of activity, but you can see that 8 days ago I updated this file, and I could just roll the clock back to before that incident happened. And you know, it's not a problem. So this is all things that are built into SharePoint. Automatic classification, labeling, data loss prevention, document retention, disposition reviews, event-based retention, e-discovery, legal holds, encryption, customer lockbox, and Azure information protection are all available on these files because they're in SharePoint. So yeah, we didn't want to reinvent that wheel. Now, perhaps my favorite feature here is that I can synchronize these. And this works with OneDrive and SharePoint because they both use the same underlying storage. So now it says that I'm synchronizing, and if I go into my files, I'm using the OneDrive sync client here. This is really great stuff. This is called Files on Demand, and you'll see that I have this little status here with little clouds. The clouds indicate that these files are here on my Windows computer, but just a pointer to the file, not the actual data. If I go and open the file, you see it changed into a little green checkbox. That means that now the file is offline in my sync client, right? And it'll stay offline until OneDrive settings, until the sync client says that it's taking up too much storage, which is a setting that you can control, so that if you had a gazillion files, you're not going to overwhelm your hard drive, right? And or if this is something maybe I want to work on a plane, I can just say always keep on this device, and the green dot becomes a solid green dot, and I can now know that this will always be synchronized. This uses that same synchronization that co-authoring and that the online clients use. And a great advantage of that is that if I just modify, say, one cell in the spreadsheet, it's only going to update that one cell over the network and not send the whole spreadsheet back down. So again, cool things that we're kind of getting for free in SharePoint. And remember where I started? I didn't start in SharePoint, I started in Teams. This UI with all these additional capabilities and the synchronization is coming soon to the Teams client. So you won't have to do this click into the SharePoint site. It'll all be here inside of the team where I can go ahead and see that. Another thing I can do here is perhaps I'd like to actually have a conversation about one of these files. And this is something that people asked for forever in SharePoint, right? They would say, look, I want to be able to kind of have a conversation that goes along with what I'm doing. And so all I have to do is click the little chat button and a conversation panel opens up. Now you can see I already had a little bit of conversation going on this. So let me just say, hello everyone. And you'll see that if I go back to the Teams channel, to the conversation, that anybody who was in this team would have a chance to now see that this was happening and come in here and collaborate with me on this document using co-authoring. So now I can edit the document with my peers while having a conversation all right here inside of Teams, and that's all made possible because SharePoint is there under the covers. Before we leave the files topic, let me just show you one other thing, which is my OneDrive. So I'll just pop over here to OneDrive. OneDrive is actually a SharePoint site under the covers. You can look at the URL. It's kind of a giveaway. SharePoint.com is right in the URL. These used to be called My Sites, and it ended up that people really wanted something more like a OneDrive, and that's why it works this way. And here you can see my Microsoft Teams chat files. So these are the files that I've shared with people. And actually, if I come in here and click on one of these, look at the details, you'll see that it has indeed shared it uniquely with the people who I was chatting with when I sent this file through a private chat. So that's how that works. But a lot of people think about SharePoint as a pages kind of experience, web pages, right? So let's shift gears for a minute and take a look at that. So I'm going to go back to my SharePoint site. Here's another quick way to get there. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to add a connector. So I'm here in the channel. I click the three dots next to the channel, and I click connectors. And these are a bunch of different applications that can send messages into my Teams channel to keep people up to date. And there's dozens of them. I'm just going to pick the one right on top here, SharePoint News. And what this is going to do is it's going to bring the SharePoint News feed that's built into a modern Teams site right into my channel. So there it is. Now let's go back into SharePoint. And something you might notice is that this isn't really what perhaps the SharePoint that you were used to over time. This is modern SharePoint. So everything here is responsive, it's faster, it's easier to edit, and that's because it's part of a modern team site that and that it's in SharePoint Online. This also works now on premises in SharePoint 2019. That I can have this kind of an experience. A great thing about it, for instance, is I can come in here and not totally geeking out on you here, but I can put this into mobile phone mode. So this is the new Edge, Chromium-based Edge client, by the way. It has this capability, as does Google Chrome. So I can just emulate an iPhone X here. And what you'll see is that same page. Now it's highlighting stuff. I didn't mean to do that. What you'll see here is that same page now as it would appear on an iPhone. And notice that with modern SharePoint, everything adapted to the size of the phone. No sideways scrolling, no tiny little links that you'd need a mouse. This would work just as well with my finger. And everything works inside of that mobile phone environment, which is just really nice. So that's part of modern SharePoint. Let me quickly show you the editing experience by making a new news post in here. So I'll go ahead and make a post, and we'll just go ahead and start with a blank template, and welcome to everyone. And let's get rid of this image. I don't really want that. Whoops, wrong button. Let me can actually put in a different image. And change the focal point of that. Maybe I really just want to show, I don't know. I'm not an artist. And now I can do things like maybe I really want 2 columns. So I can divide this 2 columns, 3 columns, divide it up differently, put some text in here. So there's a whole new suite of web parts here. If you build your own web parts, or if your friends at Agile IT build you a web part, it will work in both classic and modern SharePoint. But all of these web parts that come out of the box are only available in modern SharePoint. So this is a modern site, and so I get all this capability. Let me just pick a document here. So I'll go ahead and add a file, and I'll pick one of my documents, and let's pick that same one. And of course, I'm going to get to choose from those same documents that were in that same team. Why? Because it's the same team. It's all part of the same Office 365 group. So now, having done that, you'll see here's my news post on the home page. If I go back to Teams, the team now has a link in their conversation. It's going to take a second. It will eventually show up down here. I'll see a link to that. While we're waiting for that to happen, let me show you something else. Maybe what I'd like to do is have my team experience the kind of home page of everything that's going on and still be able to have the conversation capabilities that are inside of Teams. To do that, I just click the plus sign to add a tab. I want to add a SharePoint page. I'm going to see a list of all my SharePoint pages in just a second. And I'll go ahead and pick the right one. I believe this is the one that I want. And bang, there's my my home page right here inside of Teams. And I could just rename this to something like home. Move it over to the left a little bit so it's a little easier to discover. And now anybody who needs to refer to this information, any kind of roll-ups and resources inside of this site are now available to the people in my team. Let's see if that news came through. This is about the tab, so I'm not sure why that's slow, but normally I would get a link for that, so we can come back and check on that in a minute. One final thing I want to show here about the kind of user experience is the ability to take a SharePoint Framework web part. So this would be a web part that we've written for SharePoint, or that we've written that works in SharePoint, and make it into a tab. So this particular group of insurance adjusters are out on the road a lot, and they often need help. They often need information about their next visit that they're going to go visit a customer. And so I wrote this tab, and this is written in completely inside of the SharePoint framework. And what this does is it'll actually go and read the group's calendar. Remember, that group has a calendar as part of it. Reads the group's calendar, figures out where everybody is, and then if I want to see what I need to do to prepare for this big cheese fire damage assessment, I can just click on this link, and here's the recent transactions. These are documents tagged with that customer ID inside of the SharePoint library, a photo in SharePoint, the weather, et cetera, et cetera. So what's interesting about this is that this is a great way to build custom applications because I know that everybody in this team is a member of the group and has access to the photos and the documents and all of that information. I don't have to worry about the permissions of like what happens if somebody doesn't have permission to something. And it's right here inside the team where people are working, etc. So I'll point you at the end to a blog article that I wrote that details how this works under the covers, but I just wanted to kind of show the capability. So now what I'd like to do is, for the last part of the demo, is show you how to take a classic team site, and here's a classic team site, brings back memories, right? And this one actually, this is if you did a migration, all your sites would probably come over looking just like they always did. They'd come over with classic pages. And so this is not responsive. This doesn't work particularly well on a mobile device, etc. But what I can do here is I can actually upgrade this. Before I do, let me just take a look at the permissions on this because it's kind of interesting. Now, the site permissions are kind of hard to find on a classic site. You have to go into into a modern page, and then you're going to get this shared with capability, which will show who the site is shared with, if it wants to cooperate. Let's try this again. Take a look at the permissions here. That works the same thing. So you can see here that the site owners, Katie Jordan is an owner, Tony Smith is a member, and Madeline is a visitor of the site. Just so you kind of get a feeling for what the permissions are going into this. Then after we do the upgrade, I'll show you kind of where we ended up with on the permissions. So guess what? The first thing I have to do to make this into a team is to connect it to an Office 365 group. A classic site that came over is not going to have that Office 365 group association. It's just going to be a standalone site. And so let's go ahead and, I'm not sure if this is, I am running a beta browser, and sometimes I'm clicking and it's not listening to me. So let me try this again. There we go. And so this explains it all, and I'm not going to read this to you, but you get the idea. Here's my group. It's going to create all of that for me. I can see who my owners are and members are, and it's actually creating the group for me in the background. So we'll give this a second to run, and there we go. And now it's going to go ahead, and you'll see that I've actually got a modern page now. So this is just done by default. I could actually go back to my old page, so I didn't lose anything. Everything's still there. So my old page is still there, right? But I now also have a modern page, and you can create these at any time by just going in here to pages and creating a new page. You can create modern pages. What I really wanted to do though at this point is show you the permissions again. And what you'll see is that the group, so it's actually copied these owners and members into the new Office 365 group. It's also left them here in the site. I could actually remove them if I wanted to, because the more ideal way, once you've kind of groupified your site, is to actually control it through the Office 365 group. So that's kind of how that works, and what I wanted to show you about that. So we're almost all the way there. Now what we need to do is take that group and teamify it, make it into a team. So I'm going to go back to team, and I'll say join or create a team. We'll create the team. And I could build a team from scratch, or I could create it from somewhere. Let's create it from an existing Office 365 group. All right, now I've got a lot of groups here because I guess it's probably not a lot by production terms, but these are, I've been playing around in my test tenant. And now I actually have teamified the group. So now If I come in here and look at my team, you'll see that my owners and my members are here as part of that Office 365 group. The files, well, it created a new folder for the general channel, and I don't really have anything there yet, but the files that were originally there are still outside of that, right? Outside of that folder. So you can kind of see how this would work, that if I want to make that kind of conversion, it's absolutely doable. And I could either just go ahead and apply the team on top, maybe add the home page in here as a tab, maybe modernize the home page, or I could just kind of leave it as it is. It's up to you. And the files are just going to go into these folders. So it's kind of, again, up to you if you want to move the files into one of the channel folders. You could do that by hand, or you could automate that with some PowerShell, etc. So that's all the ways that I can think of to make these two products, to showcase these two products working together. It's all designed so that users don't have to think about it too much. So I purposely went to all these connection points, but if you went in and moved the files into the right place, put a tab with the home page, users wouldn't really think of it as Teams and SharePoint. They would think of it as, this is where I get my work done. This is where I collaborate. And that's kind of the goal here.
Thank you, Bob. And I have to say
Yeah.
that I have been guilty of looking at things and just kind of, oh, this is where the file is. I didn't realize that, well, I knew there was some structure down there, but you showed me about 4 things today that are going to speed things up so much for me, just knowing how I can sync quicker as I'm coming in and out of Teams all the time in my role in marketing.
Oh yeah, I'm glad it was helpful, and I got to tell you, it's not for everybody, but it's awful nice. Every time I get invited to a team, if there's any kind of, if it's more than a conversation, if there's files, the first thing I do is sync it, and then I just don't have to think about it anymore. The files are there on my hard drive. I can take them offline if I want, and it's just so much easier to work with it that way.
Yeah, I love my File Explorer.
Well, yeah, everybody does. And now you can kind of have the best of both worlds. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that Files on Demand feature. Excuse me, the Sync client works on a lot of different clients. Files on Demand is Windows 10 and Mac OS X only.
Okay.
So, but the other synchronization works on older versions of Windows. I use it on my phone, right? I mean, it's tremendous. So a few links. SharePoint and Teams Better Together is a blog article that goes over all of this and maybe things that I've forgotten, I'm not sure. But it's a great place to start at reading up on this. There's an article after that, Modernize Your SharePoint Site by adding it to an O365 group, that explains how that part works. And by the way, what I showed you interactively all can be scripted with PowerShell. So if you had 100 or 1,000 team sites, and you wanted to make a team and a group for every one of them, you could absolutely automate that. And then finally, I put a link to my demo that I showed, which is, I sort of call it a 360-degree collaboration style, because you're giving the business users a complete view of some business entity that they're working on. So that's it for the presentation. I'm open to questions or commentary or whatever.
Great, thank you so much, Bob. So for everybody who's watching on YouTube, we're going to call it a week. Thank you very much for joining us. You can like and follow down below, as well as a link to our full write-up.